We're looking here at the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. Shlosha Achim. Okay, that's a typical opening. Nisuin Shalosh Nachrios. Okay, so each brother, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, are married to different women who are not related to each other. He gives the example here. I don't know if you have the photocopy or not. It's Reuven's married to Sarah. Shimon is married to Rivka. Levi is married to Rach. Okay, so Reuven was married to Sarah, and he dies, and Sarah falls for Yibum, for Shimon, and Levi. The Asaba Hasheni Mimer. So Shimon does Mimer with Sarah, which means that he gives her either star or kesef, umes. So now Shimon dies. And if Shimon dies, then who falls for Yibum? Let's see. Shimon was married to Rivka, and he did a mimer with Sarah. So let's assume now that both Sarah and Rivka fall for Yibum to Levi. Levi's married to Rachel, but again, Sarah and Rivka are not related in any way to Rachel. So it would seem, offhand, if not for the mimer issue, it would seem that the coast is clear for Levi to be miyabim either Sarah or Rivka. That would seem to be. But apparently the mimer that Shimon did with Sarah is going to create problems. Let me for just a second here. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read or try to read the small print here, below the diagram. He says, Hare l'Rabbanon. Okay, when he says Rabbanon, I think he means Rabbanon of Shimon. We'll see. Shtein cholzos v'lo misyavmos. Sarah and Rivka require chalitza but not yibum. Why? Mishum shehamaymar she'asa Shimon b'Sarah kona osa lios ishto. Okay, ach eno mafkia adayin es zikas hayibum shehoisa aleha b'misas Ruven ad shetisyabim l'Shimon. Mikevan shemeis Shimon lifnei shehispik liyabimot saharei hi chayeves achshav b'yibum gam mitzad shahoisa eshes Ruven v'gam mitzad shahoisa eshes Shimon u'mishum kach harei p'tura miyibum kmo shekosav u'meis echad mehem rak im hoisa eshes ach echad chayeves b'yibum v'lo kshahoisa eshes shnei meis. Okay, so here's the punchline of this whole discussion is what's called Eshes Shnei Mesim. So Eshes Shnei Mesim is derived from a special miyut in the pasuk, and it teaches me that if a woman could imagine this hypothetical possibility that a woman is married to two brothers, to both of these brothers, and they both die, and she falls for Yibum now to the third brother. But she falls from two different brothers. There's no Yibum in that case. Why? Because of the psul, the exclusion of Eisha Shnei Mason. Here in our case, on a Darabanan level, we have Eisha Shnei Mason, because when Shimon gave a maimar to Sarah, Eishes Ruvain, and then died before he was Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum, the Zika between Ruvain, or I should say that following, the Zika that was generated by Ruvain with his death of Sarah to Levi, that Zika is still alive and well. On the other hand, Shimon was married to Rivka, and now Shimon's wife Rivka falls for Yibum to Levi, and so that since Shimon did a maimar to Sarah, see, I'm not sure if the problem here is Rivka. It could be that Rivka becomes what's called a Taras Erva. I don't know. We'll come back to Rivka later. Let's just focus our attention for a moment on Sarah. Which Zika is projecting Sarah to Yibum to Levi? Is it the Zika from Ruvain or the Zika from Shimon? Had Shimon been Miyabim Sarah Eishes Ruvain in his lifetime, had he had Hispik Lasoskein, then there would be only one Zika, as far as Sarah is concerned, which would be projected to Levi, and that would be the Zika from Shimon. But since Shimon did not successfully have the opportunity of being Miyabim Sarah, therefore the original Zika that projects Sarah to Levi from Reuven is still alive and well. It's still active. That Zika never was removed because Maimer is only the Rabbanon, and it cannot remove the Zika Dorais. So that Sarah, in terms of her relation to Levi, like that Zika of Reuven is still floating in the air. On top of that, on a Rabbanon level, once Shimon did a Maimar to Sarah, with Shimon's death, the Zika now of Sarah to Levi is projected by Shimon as well. So there are two brothers, both of whom are projecting a Zika to Levi, and therefore Sarah's situation, her status, is that of Eshes Shnei Mason. I hope I was clear about that. I'm just going to use, just to make life a little easier for me, if I can find. The problem is when you clean up your desk and then you can't find anything because you cleaned it up. So here it is. This just makes life a little bit easier for me, hopefully. Okay. The Kevon Shenifteres Miyibum, right? And I think we're talking about Sarah. He ke'eshes ach sheyesh labonin. So now he's going to explain. Now, so we've explained why Sarah needs chalitza and not yibum from Levi. What about Rivka, Eshes Shimon? He says that Sarah poteres es Rivka tzarasa min hayib, which I assume he means Tzaras Erva, because now, since there's no possibility for Levi to be miyabim Sarah now becomes Eshes Achiv. He calls it Sheish Labanim, meaning Shalom Makom Mitzvahs Yibum. Hence, she's Eshes Ach, and therefore Rivka becomes a Tzaras Erva. Okay, so that's all according to Rabbanon. Reb Shimon, Miyabem li eza mehen sheyirtze, chooses, Levi, of course, chooses between Sarah and Rivka. Which one should be his Yibum partner? The Yachalot Slitshnia, and the other one needs Chalitza. Mishum she mistape. Okay, so this has to be clarified here that Rabbi Shimon has a suffix. Im zikas hayibum shel Sarah l'Shimon yachad im hamaymar she'asa ba machshivin osa kiknusa elov min haTorah legamri. So, if I understand correctly, the question is, what's the status of Maimar? And Rav Shimon has a tzad to say that Maimar is kiknusa, that the Kiddushin in the Yevamot L'Shuk with Zikas Kibu is a valid Kiddushin. Min haTorah, legamri. In the past, I thought we identified that with Beit Shammai. I don't remember Rav Shimon. But in any event, V'tzarech Levi liyabem rakes achas mehen shereishten naflu lefonav b'Shimon. So on one side, to say that the Maimer was Kona Kinyan Gomer Min haTorah, then Shten Naflu Lefonav Mishimon. Right? Levi's only going to be miyabim one of these two wives, because now Shimon has two wives. Shimon is married to Rivka, that's the old ancient wife, and Shimon is married to Sarah by virtue of Maimer, which is now Kona Kinyan Gomer in this side in the suffix of Shimon. So these two wives fall for Yibum from Shimon to Levi, and you're only miyabim one and not the other. Oh, shafilu ima Maimer eina nechsheves kiknusa l'Shimon klal. Now we go to the other side of the suffix of Shimon, that Maimer is not a Kinyan. Memela chayev b'Yibum. Both are obligated in Yibum, meaning that Levi has to be miyabim Sarah by virtue of Zikas Ruvain, and Rivka by virtue of Zikas Shimon. And Shimon, there's no relationship between Shimon and Sarah, because now we're assuming that Maimer is not Kona. Umimela chayeves shtein b'Yibum, Sarah keishes Ruvain, Rivka keishes Shimon. Umisafek miyabim liachas v'choletz l'shni. In other words, we're not going to allow Yibum for both of them, although, again, if, according to that side, Maimer is not Kona, there should be Yibum to both of them. One, meaning Sarah is Eishes Ruvain, and two, Rivka is Eishes Shimon. But nevertheless, there is a tzad to say that Shimon is married to both Rivka, his old wife, and Sarah, which would mean that there's only Yibum to one of them. You're not miyabim both wives of your late brother. So therefore, we're only going to allow Yibum for one of them. Take your choice, Levi's pick, and then the other one will get Chalitza. That's what we have. That's what we have so far. Harei elu choltzos v'lo misyabmos. Okay, so this is obviously Shita of the Chachamim, right? We're not yet ready for Shimon officially inside. Shenemar umeis echad mehem Yevama yavo aleh v'darshu she'ein mitzvah yibum el Yevama kazu sheish aleh zikas yavam echad v'lo kazu sheish zikas shnei Yevamim. So now we're talking on a Derabanan level, right? It's Achamim of Rabbi Shimon on a Derabanan level that recognize Maimer as a Kinyan Derabanan, which means now that Sarah is being projected to Yibum, to Levi, through two brothers, both Reuven, who was originally married to Sarah, and Shimon, who did a mimer with Sarah. And since the exclusion here is lo sheish aleo zika shnei yevamim, so two brothers are sending a zika down to Levi, the third brother, on the same Isha. And he writes here, V'sara zusha is kachel Shimon, yesh aleo zika shnei yevamim, zika mibaila Ruvain shemes. Okay, fine. And now again, we're assuming that that zika from Ruvain is still alive and well. It's still active because Shimon's mimer is only D'Rabbanan. So on a D'Oraisa level, Shimon's mimer doesn't register on the rectus scale. Zika shnia mi Shimon shenis kachelo is mimer, which again Midrabbanan sets up a zika that's projected by Shimon for the same Sarah. Lachein choletzes lelevi v'eina misyabemes. Okay, so again, we're not yet ready to discuss Rivka, who's the other wife of Shimon. She l'chora should fall for Yevamot to Levi. Why not? And the answer is that once we activate this rule of Zika Shnei Yevamim, as we discussed earlier, that becomes Eishes Ach, and she becomes a Tzara. Okay, fine. Rav Shimon Omer, Miyabim li'ezeh sheyirtza v'choletz l'shniya. Okay. That's what we explained before. We has a paragraph to introduce the Gemara. In Gittin, it says on Pei Beis, Shayach she'isha achas tia nesua l'shnei anoshim. How could it be possible that a woman, one single woman, would be married to two men? That seems impossible because Ein Kedushin Tovsim b'Yeshitzi. Keep going. So this is going to be the mission of Shiur, if I'm not mistaken. Going Ruvain Kidesh Isha min Ashuk, V'hisna b'Kedushin Shiur chutz mi Shimon. So that's the Shiur. So that his Kedushin generates an Isra on the entire world, with the exception of Shimon. O Shimon v'Kidcha Stam. Hadinu Sheshnei Kedushin Chalim. Tapela. But both marriages to this woman, both Ruvain with his Shir for Shimon and Shimon with his Stam, are married to this woman. Mesu Shneim, both Reuven and Shimon died. They have a brother, Levi. Eina misyabemes. There's no yibum. Kevan sheyesh aleh zika shnei yevamim. So that Mishnah and Sugya in Gittin is identical with what we're seeing here in our Mishnah here in Yevamos. Lo tzivsa Torah b'mitzvahs yibum ela b'yevam sheyesh aleh zikas yavam echad bilvad. So again, the difference between the two cases is only in the details. As far as the application of the principle of lo sheyesh aleh zika shnei yevamim, they're identical. But that zika shnei yevamim can be fleshed out in two different areas. In Gittin, through Shir, and in here, in Yevamos, through Maimah. So the Gemara asks the question, the Zika Shnei Yevamim D'Oraisa. So right now we're assuming, I don't know why we did question this premise, but the premise is that the exclusion of Yibum in the case of Zika Shnei Yevamim is D'Oraisa. And now let's assume for a moment that when Shimon did a Maimar with Sarah, Eishes Ruvain, he was Kona a Kinyan Gomer. Let's just go with that side, which in Rav Shimon for sure is a valid argument. Is therefore chalitza nami lo tiboy. So again, the Gemara is sort of naively assuming that according to the Chachamim of Rabbi Shimon, Maimar is a Kinyan Gomer min Torah. The Gemara is also assuming, and that I don't think is naive at all, that Zika Shnei Yevamot is Dorais. We derived it from a pasuk. Now, if you combine those two premises, then we don't understand why the Tanakam of our Mishnah requires Chalitza at all. In Zika Shnei Yevamot, like for example in the Sugya in Gittin, there would be no requirement of Chalitza. There's no mitzvah Yibum, and therefore there's no Chalitza at all. Ella, says the Gemara, we're forced into a corner, and we have to assume Midrabanan. Now, I assume the word Midrabanan means that, second, oh, I see. At this point, I guess the Gemara is still insisting and still accepting the premise that Maimer is a Kinyan Gom. Right? There are two premises here that have to exclude. We have to exclude one of the two premises. We can't maintain both these premises simultaneously and justify Chalitza. We're going to have to drop the ball on one of these two premises. Premise number one is that Maimer is Dorais. Maimer is a Kinyan Gom. Premise number two is that the exclusion of Yibum in the case of Zikash Yivam is Dorais. You can't have both at the same time and then require Chalitza. Not in the context of Abnish. So we're going to have to be forced to drop one of these two premises. My intuition would have dropped the premise about the status of Maimer, but the Gemara is dropping a different premise about the status Isha Shnei of Isha Sheishal Zika Shnei Yevamot. Ela derabana, that Zika Shnei Yevamot is derabana. The only thing is, in my Masifta, maybe you have it in yours as well, he says, Kevan de Midaraisa ein Maimar Kona b'Yevamot. So it's interesting. He's saying that in this case of Maimar, the halacha of excluding Zikas Shnei Yevamim is the Rabbana. In other words, not that the principle per se is the Rabbana. The exclusion of Yibum and Zika Shnei Yevamim is derived from a pasuk, and that makes it Doraisa. But its application here in our Mishnah, as a result of Shimon's Maimar to Sarah, is only the Rabbanan, because Midaraisa ein Maimar Kona b'Yevam. Uksera. Oh, so now we're asking the following question. If Maimar is not Kona b'Yevama, then in this case there should be Yibum. Forget about Chalisa for a moment. There should have been Yibum. So you're going to have to say that Midrabanan, because of the Maimar, they excluded Yibum. So now the Gemara wants to formulate, why did the Rabbanan insist on excluding Maimar, excluding Yibum, as a result of Maimar? Gzera Shemiyomru Shtei Yevamas Habos Mibais Echad Misyabmos. Okay, what's on now? Shtei Yevamos Habos Echad Kigon Shahayu Ruvain v'Shimon Achim v'Nosa Shimon Es Sarah v'Es Rivka Meishim v'Lo Banim Noflu Shtei Noshev Liibum Lefnei Ruvain Mesiabmos. Right, so what does that mean? Oh, Mesiabmos is what the Rabbanan are afraid of. They're afraid that mistakenly they would allow Levi to be miyabim. Forget about Levi. Levi's not in the picture. Sorry. It's just Reuven and Shimon. They would allow Shimon to be miyabim both Sarah and Rivka, the two wives of Reuven. Umin Torah, just reading the commentary here. Asur l'shteim l'syamin. The darshu. Now we introduce another drasha, which we've had in the past. Is echad hu boneh below shtei batim. Okay, so that's the doraisa. Now let's see how our case, if the halacha would allow for yibum, how that could lead to this mistake of bais echad v'lo shtei bat. What happens now? Shimon. Very good. Shimon did a maimar with Sarah. Shimon has a wife, Rivka. When he dies, if we were to allow yibum, which again on a deraisa level, we could allow for yibum. Well, let's just think about that. On a deraisa level, since Maimer is not koneh, so therefore, as we said earlier, let's just review. Sarah falls for yibum from Reuven, and Rivka falls from yibum from Shimon, both falling to Levi from two different brothers. And therefore there should be yibum for both of them, which in fact Reb Shimon in our Mishnah maintains that position, that he takes a choice of which one he wants to be miyabim. And if not for the Maimer, basically Levi could have been miyabim both of them, and he would be mekayim the mitzvah even with both of them. But here, as a result of Maimer, it looks like if we would allow Levi to be miyabim both Sarah and Rivka, it looks like a case of bais echad, meaning that Levi's be miyabim two wives of Shimon, because in effect, if the Rabbanon are afraid that since he gave again, when I use pronouns, it's a little tricky, but since Shimon gave Sarah Kiddushin, Kesef Kiddushin, or Shtar Kiddushin, it looks like in the eyes of the spectator they're married. And now, if we would allow Levi to be miyabim both Sarah and Rivka, it would look like Levi's being miyabim two wives from the same Yavam, which would be a violation of the Torah law by Sechad Bone v'lo shnei bat. So he explains it. He says, Kevan she'asa b'sheni maimer af shemidaraisa eina yivama shekidesh nasis kishto. Arranged shtei yivamas habos shtei batim, meaning both Reuven and Shimon are projecting each one respectively their wives to Levi, and that would be shtei batim. He could be miyabim both of them. Ruis shteim l'syabim in Torah. Meaning through Shimon is Gazu Shlo Yavim Ishteyan. Fine. So that's what the Gemara suggests. Let's just think if we've answered our question of Chalitza. Oh yeah, now we have an answer to the question of Chalitza as well. Why does Levi have to give Chalitza to both Sarah and Rivka? Because on a Doraisa level, they both fall for Yibum. And in fact, Levi should have been miyab in both of them, or could have been miyab in both of them. So therefore, they both need chalitza. Yibum we won't allow because of this gzera that it looks like, as a result of the Maimar to Rivka, that Maimar to Sarah, that both Sarah and Rivka are coming from the same brother Shimon. But the Gemara is not happy with this. Why not? V'niyabim lechada v'nichlotz lechada. Oh, brilliant question. Why are you excluding Yibum in both cases? I mean, you're worried about Levi being miyabim two women coming from the same husband. So there's a simple solution to that. Let Levi be miyabim one of them, and the other one will get chalitza. He says here, Sharei b'shtei Yevamas habos mibais echad, ein iser ella im shten misyabmos. Right? In the case of Reuven and Shimon that we discussed earlier, Shimon cannot be miyabim both wives of Reuven, but he can be miyabim one of them. But כשאחת מסייבמת והשנייה חולצת, אין איסור בדבר. מדוע הכווה התנא? Our Tana here. And he required chalitza for both of them. Why should it be any different than Reuven dying with two wives that he left for Shimon, and Shimon be miyabim one of the two? So the Gemara answers, Kseva Shemi Yomru, Bayis Echad Miktsaso Banui, Umiktsaso Cholutz. Let's see if we can figure what that out it means. De Yevamos, Shenaflu Mi Bayis Echad. Okay, so that's Reuven married to two wives, and he dies and leaves them for Shimon. Is Miktsaso Banui, Umiktsaso Cholutz. Sheyomu shemutal yavim achas lachlotz lacheres. So we're afraid that people would mistakenly conclude that the second wife, which was not the selected wife of Shimon, would require chalit. I mean, if you ask me, what would be the worst scenario? That a Kohen can't marry her. Oh, so the Gemara is going to ask this question. V'yomru, what are you so nervous about? Okay, so people think that the second wife of Reuven requires chalitza. In Yiddish, we say "vas artmir." Are you familiar with that? Vas artmir. What? All right, I have to shake your head here. But vas artmir means, what's a schlep? What do I lose by it? So the Gemara answers, either miyabim v'hodar cholitz hachinave. The issue here is the sequence. If he begins with yibum, and he's miyabim one of them, and then he's cholitz the other one, then you're right. There's no justification for the isur. Because so what do we lose if the people mistakenly conclude that the second one needs chalit? Ella, here's where we're really afraid. Once you require, in the case of two ladies falling for yibum to one person, one brother, yibum to one and chalitza to the other, it might get swapped around. He might do the chalitza to one of them first, and then the yibum to the other one. Now, once he does chalitza, we said that there's an isur kares to be miyabim any of the other Yevamos, the tzaros. Zera dilma cholitz bereisha. He'll switch around the order, and he'll start with chalitza. And he doesn't think there's any kpeda here, and any significance and legal demands that he do it in a certain sequence. It's free for all. he knows that one needs chalitza, one needs yibum, he'll start with chalitza. For Hadar b'yabim is hashnia, then he's going to be miyabim the second one. V'vadai li'achar sha'achas choletzes. So the chalitza of one of the various sorrows that were married to the late brother, poteres shar hayivamos mizikas yibum. Right, you don't need to give chalitza to every single one of the wives of the late Reuven. Well, one wife, chalitza, whoever, it doesn't matter which one, and that part is removes the zikas yibum from the rest of the wives. V'komle be'iser asher lo yivne. Now, I'm not sure asher lo yivne is a lav or a chiv kares. We had a machlokas, I think, between Reish Lakish and Yochanan about that. Rachmana Omar, Keved shelo bana shuv lo yivne. Right, it says asher lo yivne, which means that you give chalitza because you don't want to build the house of your late brother. And once you give that chalitza, shuv lo yivne. He doesn't have an option of turning around and saying, okay, I gave a chalitza, I made a mistake, I want to do tshuva, and I want to be miyabim. And that halacha applies now to all the wives of your late brother, all the tzaras of the late brother. So therefore, let's get back now to the Mishnah, our Mishnah. Even though we would certainly allow Yibum first and then Chalitza second, but the Chachamim were choshesh that as a result, this will cause him to switch around the order. And Lekach Yavo Lahatir V'shtei Yevamos Habos Mibais Echad. Right, so you have Reuven dies and leaves his two wives for Shimon. Lachlo Tchila. Why not do Chalitza first? And in the mind of the Yavam, he doesn't see any difference. Yachach liyab. L'chein amru sheshtein choltzos lo tisyavim af achasmi. Interesting. We're removing a mitzvah d'oraisa of yibum. He could be miyavim one and cholitz the other. But we're not going to allow that because we're afraid he'll do the chalitza first and the yibum second. Okay. Now, I don't know if in your Gemara you have like an introduction here to the next sugya. So we're now on the top of Lamed page, and he has here an introduction. He says, of course, a Yevama cannot get married unless she has Yibum or Chalitza. And then afterwards, she can marry anyone. Obviously, after Yibum, she'll need a get. And he quotes a Mishnah later on in Daf Nun Amid Beis. Im nosan hayavam get liyavimto lifnei shekonasos. So we touched on this in the past. I think instead of maimar, he gave a get. Also lo lichnos oso liachamikan. Why? Why can't he change his mind to marry her and be Makai in the midst of Yibum? Why does the get undermine the possibility of Yibum? And the answer is, says the Gemara, that the Torah doesn't recognize the efficacy of a get to remove Zikas Yibum. Only Chalitza alone could achieve that goal. So therefore, this get really has no chalos on a dorais level. The Rabbanan recognize the get. Umir Rabbanan gazru sha'af get yeh dino kechalutza. Right, we said that once a man gives chalitza, he can no longer marry the Yevama, excuse me. And the same thing's going to happen in a substitute for chalitza on a D'Rabbanan level, which is, again, Kevan Shemiatiru Oso Liyabim, Acher Shenosan Laget Lizikas, Yomru Shigam Acher Chalitza Muteris. So, in other words, people in their minds identify get with chalitza, chalitza with get. So if you can allow him to marry her and be miyabim after he gave her get, people think he's going to be miyabim after chalitza. I mean, we see over and over again in this Masechet how many teres chacham there are. I mean, at the end, you cut down the whole mitzvah of yibum. The lo yavdilu ben chalitza leget. Kmochein yavam yochel lekadishes yuvimto mirabbanan. Okay, that's halach. Yesh cholkim v'sovrim she maimer konem in ator b'yevama. Ukiddushin elu nikra b'shem maimer v'adinu sheyochel hayavam legarish beget lafkias hakiddushin she'asa ba. So let's just think about this. A man does a mimer, and we're assuming that mimer is not kona min Torah, and now he gives her a get, and the get now removes the kedushin that was generated on a D'Rabbanan level through mimer. And if I understand correctly, at this point we're back to square one. And the situation would be equal to that of a Yevamot that didn't get a mimer. Because if you recall, we said that if there was a mimer, that would prohibit Yibum vis-a-vis the other brothers. I mean, that brother that did mimer is Sai Gesund, go ahead and be Mekayim the mitzvah of Yibum. But as far as the other brothers is concerned, that mimer is like Kiddushin, and it excludes the other brothers. But now he gave her a get. And the get is effective now to remove the mimer. So that's what we have to analyze. What is the situation after mimer and after get that was given to undermine the mimer?